Right. Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if you've got any questions or anything for today.
I guess, am I on or not?
Yeah, you're on. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. I guess my question is, has the Lord shown you the timeline of events unfolding right now and in the future?
um, that's a good question. Um, I I I believe in terms of a general prophetic timetable of events and things that are overlapping events of God's seasons that God is working with. Yes. So I've seen the seasons that have been potentially going since 1984, and I think we're in a generation that is running from 1975 to 2015, so I believe next year is a really significant year. That 1975 was when the prophecy was given of a billionfold harvest, and Bob Jones brought that prophecy. I believe a lot of people have misinterpreted that prophecy over the last 40 years, and a whole generation is not prepared for that harvest. A lot of people took on that it was going to be only young people. Don't believe that was actually the correct interpretation of it. It's a new generation. That is the generation that we need to be a Joshua generation to prepare them. And a whole generation has been like the Moses generation that went around the wilderness and didn't cross over. And so next year is the 40th anniversary, a generation since that prophetic word was released in 1975. So I do believe that's a significant thing. And so I believe that there is a challenge coming to cross. And I even recently, there's been several prophetic words. I think I've heard Chuck Pierce give one. I think Rick Joyner gave one about we're at the river. And are we going to cross, or are we going to carry on going around the wilderness? And I think that's a question which is coming. And I believe God will be challenging people to leave the old Moses generation behind and the ways of the Moses generation, even though they were awesome and miracles and signs and wonders and amazing things that took place, to embrace a new level of spiritual authority in the heavens and not just trying to outwork it on the earth in a horizontal way, but actually going into the heavens and outworking it. So there is a new order, the order of Melchizedek. It's a new order that is not going to function the old way the old order did. So I certainly believe that that is the case. I know that there is a lot of stuff flying around prophetically right now, which I would say is inducing fear, or the people's interpretation of it is inducing fear. I'm not saying that was the intention that people brought it with, but it's seemingly creating a fearful view of what's coming. And rather than, hey, we're going to be overcoming and we're going to be operating in the kingdom and the mountain of the house of the Lord is going to be raised up, it is creating with a lot of people, hey, we're going to wait to be rescued. And that, to me, is not what God is going to do. He is not going to rescue a generation. He is going to bring a new generation who are going to be equipped in the supernatural ways of the kingdom of God. So I believe the old order having ended means that we get to write history. It is not set. It's up to us to, in agreement with God in sonship, to establish what will be on the basis of looking back into what was and seeing God's initial purpose and intention, so that then we can bring that into what is today, which will change what will be tomorrow. So I don't believe that tomorrow is like fate, that it's already been written. I believe that we're called to establish that history by engaging with the destiny and the purposes of God and bringing that into our day so that we get every new day as a new beginning to embrace a new day. You know, the end of the old day is the beginning of a new, and that means we go back into what God intended for it, find our mandate and destiny and scroll for it today, and then outwork it today. So I know I've seen Ian engage this in the whole thing of the order of Melchizedek and the challenge that old order has ended, and therefore a lot of what people were seeing or looking into is no longer applicable because that order's ended. The prophetic apostolic movement, to a great degree, I'm not saying everyone's like this, but they created top-down mountains on earth. And the prophetic movement became people who prophesied rather than people who equipped the church to go and hear God for themselves. And I think the apostolic movement, in a sense, has operated in that same way. Rather than equipping people to get their mountains and their mandates and their blueprints from heaven, they've looked to establish something on earth which is their own mountain, and those mountains are in the wilderness, and they'll stay there unless they're prepared to get off them and demolish what they're doing and establish a new way. Because the way of the order of Melchizedek is a reflection of what's in heaven, and if you reflect a mountain in heaven, it actually is upside down on earth, which forms the sort of the pyramid shape of the four faces of God. And everything has to operate in an upturned way, a reflection of heaven, the shadow of heaven on earth, of that blueprint, is that we are the foundation that releases people into their destiny to go further and higher and further than us. That's what you do when you're a Joshua generation. You cause a people to take their inheritance in the land. And that I believe is what we're being prepared to do. So I think we're at a very interesting time, and there to me is a lot of contention in the Christian community over that, and challenges around it. So can I see into the future? I choose not to, because I want to establish the future out of what I look into from God's perspective in the past. And so I see it differently from what I did even 6 months ago, probably, in how we're supposed to affect and outwork that. Because we're sons. Yeah, sons are entrusted with the authority of creative establishing the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So it's a new order of things, really, which is being established. And I think we're in a really quick transition period from 2012 until 2015. You know, in 2012, God spoke to me about 3 years of preparation, and I didn't recognize the significance of 2015 at the time. I was just focused on, okay, let's get on and prepare. What does that mean? How do we prepare? But then this year, God has really clarified that in terms of next year and the 40th anniversary, and the need that this next generation is not going to stay in the wilderness. It has to cross, and therefore I think part of the problem is people take the word judgment and apply punishment to it rather than a separation of what is and what isn't of God. And I think that line is coming. I think there is a fiery sword going to draw a line of separation that says, this looks like me, I'm occupying this. This no longer looks like me, I'm not occupying it. You have a choice whether you stay in what doesn't look like me or whether you cross over into what does, and that will be a massive challenge for the church at large. But that's why we're called to herald and release the sound, and to get as many people hearing the sound as possible, so that we can raise up this generation of mentors who will be ready for the harvest when it comes. So some of my perspective on it. I've had a few challenges over it recently, but that's what I see. So what was behind your question? What is it that you are?
Well, I just think it's time to rise and shine,
Yeah.
and in that shining, that we need to speak forth what God is telling us to do, and the angels, I believe, will accommodate us, and I believe that God wants. I believe groaning creation is groaning and
Yeah.
is waiting for us
Yeah.
to stand forth and shine and do what we're supposed to do.
Yeah. Mm.
And so I was just wondering if you saw like the restoration of all things taking place through the sons of God
Yeah.
at a very soon hour. I mean, we may be in the beginning of it because we're just learning how to get our mandates or get our go into heaven and hear what the
Mm.
Lord is saying. But
Yeah.
I mean, those of us that have uh, been in the Word a long time and have gotten mandates and have gotten, their mountains, they're secure in their mountains and their authority. I believe, you know, I believe that miracles in the form of setting groaning creation free are supposed to be starting.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying. I see that is what we are preparing for right now, is that we are raising up sons to administer government, and I've seen governmental things being established particularly across the U.S., particularly across the 49th parallel at the top of the U.S. I think it's that between Canada and the U.S. People who don't know each other are beginning to form benches of three, and they're beginning to establish government, and they are beginning to vibrate and bring things into order, and there's some things going on with that. I think we need to establish embassies of heaven on earth. I mean, my view is we need cities of refuge that are going to be operating under the government of God. They are going to be the kingdom of heaven expressed on earth. We're going to live under the laws of heaven, not the laws of earth. We're going to be outside of the shaking that is going to go on in the world system, because we will be ruling in it. And I fully believe that the mountain of the house of the Lord is going to be raised up above all the other hills, mountains, and any authority that there is, so that it says the whole nations will stream to it, and they'll be saying, teach us. How can you live with full supernatural provision? How can you live in health and wholeness? How can you live under this when everyone else can't? Now, there's an interpretation of cities of refuge is that they are places that you defend. For me, there are places that are beachheads that you take ground from. There are administrative centers for taking ground and restoring all things. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. In the restoration of all things, that is what the creation is waiting for. It's waiting for the manifestation of God's sons to bring restoration, to do the original mandate, to bring dominion, to subdue, to fill the earth, to be fruitful. The same sort of Genesis 1:28 mandate, that is what we've been given. And so that actually means changing and transforming things. So yeah, I believe that in those cities of refuge, that we will then begin to take and expand the garden, if you like, that we'll be living in, because we'll be living in a garden that overlaps heaven and earth, in the garden just like it was in the original. And then we begin to take ground, and we will terraform and transform things. We will move mountains physically. We will shift rivers. We will bring those things. We will vibrate with the frequency of heaven, and we will bring order to those territories that we have authority over. And that might seem a huge way away for a lot of people of impossibility. It isn't. Once we embrace our destiny and the full authority that we have as sons to operate in heaven, and then to see the kingdom manifested on earth through our lives, that we become a gateway of heaven on earth. And I think a lot of the things we do now will just be irrelevant in that time. Evangelism as we do it and our methodologies will be irrelevant in that time. We will be arising and shining, and the glory of the Lord will be evident, and people will come to the light of his rising in us. It will be a totally different way of operating everything. Signs, wonders, and miracles in the way that they've been operating right now won't be the same. We'll be living in an environment of health. I mean, I think I remember years ago looking at the transformation videos that were put out, and seeing places that just seemed to be living under an open heaven, and they had crops that grew to enormous sizes, and we will be having those things. We'll be operating with the fruit that comes from the tree of life, which means there will be perpetual fruit every season. There's just so much really that is different. Part of the problem is we only know what we've always known, and this is going to be nothing like what we've always known, and therefore unless you can see it what it's like in heaven, you have no frame of reference for it, and therefore you're just expecting things to carry on as they are, and they will not carry on as they are. But we have a period in which we have to get ready. So it's really important that we embrace our destinies, that we take our authority, that we start establishing the benches of three and the governments that carry a blueprint of heaven, and that shadow of heaven will be occupied by the glory of God. And so Jesus is not going to return until the restoration of all things. So he's also not going to return for a bride and a church that is full of wrinkles, spots, and blemishes. So there's a lot of transformation that needs to take place in us to bring us into that place. And when you look back and see what happened with Abraham, when Abraham engaged the heavens and Sarah engaged the heavens, they changed physically. Sarah was an old woman who could not bear children, and she became the most beautiful woman in all the earth. That is not just a euphemism. She physically changed. Abraham physically changed. Moses physically changed when he was in the presence of God, so much so that he had to wear a veil over his face to hide the fact that he was reflecting the four faces of God in glory. And that was just him being in the presence of God, not God being in him like we have. So we're living under a better covenant. The order of Melchizedek is in a better covenant. So the glory is we don't have to wear a veil, or we shouldn't be that. We are in an unveiled state. The veil is torn. We can go through, and therefore there's a lot of change which is absolutely coming to bring us body, soul, and spirit into the resurrection power of God. And I think, I was listening to Ian Clayton recently, and he was talking really about the fact that most people aren't really interested in the body because they just think they're going to get a new one day. Well, we actually need to be a transformed body now in our own lives, so that we are transformed into the image of God. We carry the DNA of God. We are not carrying the genealogy of the record of our parents. We've been transformed, and we're the order of Melchizedek that has no genealogy. Well, we have to get some stuff done to do that, but it can happen really quickly, I think, once we learn how to govern and rule. So yeah, I can hear the groan of creation. I can also hear the sound that's coming out of heaven, which is vibrating and bringing people into sonship and aligning people with sonship, so that we will change the frequency of that groan and answer it. And yeah, I mean, we're living in exciting times. We must not get caught up with focusing on the earthly right now, because that is a dangerous thing, I feel. And there are those who will be drawn to the earthly, and even some of the manifestations of the things that are going on. We've got to be really careful that people don't get caught up in seeking them for the manifestations rather than engaging in the person with God. And some of those things, I'm not sure of some of them personally. I'm not saying that they're the enemy or anything, but people's giftedness and the things that people can do sometimes operates in an earthly realm and dimension, and I believe God wants us to be stepping into a heavenly realm and dimension to change the earth. I'm not saying we shouldn't be changing the earth, but we do it from there. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We need to be taking charge of the courts and ruling and the thrones of heaven, because that's what sonship does. It rules. It doesn't just go around healing the sick or raising the dead or doing things. That's just what everyone should do in reality. But I believe in the heavenly establishing of heavenly government is going to change and transform that we will live in an atmosphere where there is no sickness, where there is no death, because we live in the atmosphere of heaven. Well, to do that, we have to have the atmosphere of heaven flowing through us and manifesting through us. We need everlasting doors open so that the glory is manifested on the earth. Well, to do that, you have to be lifted up as heads and gates so that the everlasting doors can be commanded to be open, so that the King of Glory can come in through us, and so that glory will be manifested and we will begin to radiate and be transfigured. I think representing the four faces of God on earth is not just a spiritual thing. I think there is a physical dimension to glory which we really need to get hold of, and we will start to come into as things come. But it's we're in interesting times, that's for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So is that sort of the sort of thing you were thinking about?
Yeah, that was very good. I really appreciate you sharing all that, because it's just on the one hand, I've already had experiences with where the Spirit has led me into like praying for a whole forest, like in Northern California.
Yeah.
And then the Lord confirmed what I did through 3 days of rain in the middle of July.
Yeah.
That's supernatural.
Yeah.
So I just, I've been kind of, throughout the years, I've done different things, and just, I just have such a heart to set groaning creation free that, I'm just wondering, is this the time or is God waiting for the corporate body to come together, and will it happen all at once, or will it, how does he look at that?
It's going to happen. It's going to come through people who are living in sonship, because God has given us the government of this realm. It's like that He has given us the dominion of this realm. He is not going to do it for us. He's going to do it through us. Just like He worked through Jesus, He's going to use us. We will be co-heirs. We will be partnering with Him. We will be operating and having charge over the courts. We will be able to stand in the councils of God. We will be able to engage in chancellorship. It's like a lot of what's going on in the heavens and the angelic beings that are operating some of the courts is because we've not matured to the place where we're doing it. It's like we should be operating in as chancellors in the courts to authorize things on the earth. It's like those are things that we are supposed to be doing. Whole Zechariah 3, 6 and 7, or the whole first 7 verses really, it says, if we will walk in His ways. Well, those of us who've embraced friendship with God have been walking as good stewards in His ways. Now we have to start going beyond that into outworking his laws, his government as lords, and then establishing the rule of God as kings and administering the government of God and taking charge of those courts and beginning to administer the things in the realm of the spirit. All those things are opening up right now. You know, that's what I want to equip people to do. I want to encourage people to get hold of their destiny in those things. You know, there are things that we should be engaging in that only a few people are. So we have to get the equipping done to get people embracing who they really are. I mean, it is happening. There are things happening. You know, we're seeing a definite change in spiritual atmosphere, in engagement. You know, we've had people in our meetings being translated into other parts of the world and ministering to people in the spirit in Russia and other places. You know, we're starting to see an activation of engaging in the realms of the spirit. You know, we've had a huge increase in angelic involvement and engagement because we're engaging the angelic realm. You know, so there is really good signs of where we are. We just need to keep pressing in for it, embracing it. I think there's going to be revelation that opens up of the 12 laws that come out of Zion, which, you know, we've been operating the 12 laws that are in Jerusalem and administering them here, but we need to engage what's coming out of the heavenly rule. And I think there's a whole lot of just ready to start to be opened up. Wisdom is going to open up avenues. You know, I've had access to some of the chancellor's courts, and it's different. You know, there's a different dimension to it, and all that is coming. You know, there was a person, you know, I was speaking to a while back who went into heaven, engaged their mountain, got a mandate for a particular country in Africa, felt called to administrate water in that country, started decreeing and declaring things from their mountain. Within a couple of days, a huge lake had appeared in the desert. You know, and they were like, "Oh, do you think I had anything to do with that?" And I'm saying, yeah, of course you did. There may well have been other people who also were given a mandate to call things, but, you know, it's no coincidence that she gets a mandate, goes to a mountain, calls things in a particular nation to do with water, and a huge lake appears in the desert. You know, and it's, you know, all over the newspapers and different things. You know, there's just stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, administrating those dimensions of the kingdom. You know, and there's a difference between, you know, walking in his ways here and operating in charge of the courts. You know, and a lot of people are still trying to walk in his ways and focus on that, as, you know, being caught up in the miracles and the gemstones and all the stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's great, but that is not it. You know, Moses saw amazing miracles in the wilderness. Their clothes didn't wear out. They had water out of rocks. You know, they had food delivered to them every day supernaturally. It's like those were miracles, awesome miracles. But that wasn't what the promised land was about. You know, it wasn't about miracles in this realm. It's about operating in the realm of heaven. You know, and God is looking for people who are willing to embrace sonship in operating in that level of authority, and He's looking for people who will say yes and learn to do it. So, yeah. Okay.
I lost you for a minute.
Yeah,
Technical.
dropped off. Paula dropped off as well. So.
Yeah. Something that I want you to, if you could touch on the bench of three.
Yeah.
I mean, I understand it's about government and authority, but that's something that, you know, I haven't seen established here yet. How does that outwork in the earth? How do we outwork that here? What, you know, if you can just talk about that for a minute.
Well,
how do I establish that here?
Yeah, sure. Well, in a sense, what you need is in a sense, what it's talking about a pattern of government which reflects heaven. and you have the Father, Son, and the Spirit in the realm of heaven. In the realm of heaven, they operate as a bench of three. They have 7 spirits of God. They have the 4 living creatures representing the 4 faces of God before the throne. They have function in government. The order of Melchizedek operates in the sense of the lion, the ox, the eagle, and the man. There's a sense where we are called into that government. So, you know, if you think of the government of God is 3, and you get 3 times 3 there is 9, but the government is 12. You know, so we are called into government. I mean, we're called to be part of that government, to open up that to manifest on earth. You know, you can have agreement in heaven with the Father, Son, and the Spirit, and if there's no earthly agreement, then there's no manifestation on the earth. You know, and strange though that may seem, it's like there's too much placed on the sovereignty of God. Well, God just does it. He's sovereign. It's just up to him. No, he is limited to his sovereignty. He does nothing without revealing it through his holy prophets, for instance. So he's looking for agreement all the time between the 3 in heaven to agree on earth. And so we need to see, I like to view it like this. If you have in heaven a blueprint, which is a mandated scroll for government on earth, and you see the glory of God manifested as the bench of 3, then if that shines down over that blueprint, what will it form on the earth? A shadow. So there's something on the earth that's a shadow of what's in heaven, and then you have in heavenly agreement, you're looking for earthly agreement that reflects what is in heaven. So a bench of 3 is an earthly government around that scroll or mandate or blueprint that looks to establish it on the earth. And that means that you have apostolic and prophetic coming together to form an ark that brings that government. So you have, and I'm not talking about fivefold ministry, apostolic and prophetic here, because in heaven you have the kingly and the priestly function, which then that forms an ark so that the glory can produce that shadow, and on the earth you get agreement between those two to bring a manifestation of glory to fill that shadow. And you know, I'll dig up a diagram about that somehow. I've got a diagram which explains how it works and sort of, you know, it sort of shows it. So you have in heaven a mountain of Zion where the throne of God is, and it is governing like that downwards through the 4 faces of God and through the 7 spirits of God. That then produces the shadow. On earth you need the opposite. So you need a bench of 3, then working through 7 mountains, working through the 4 faces of God in terms of ministry, and releasing people to fill that shadow with the glory of their destiny. So for me, every single ministry, church, ecclesia, gathering, whatever, needs a blueprinted mandate and needs a bench of 3 to operate. And in actual fact, what I've seen over the last few months really is that represents the lion, the ox, and the eagle, kingly, prophetic, priest, and apostolic function, but it's always looking for a 4th agreement, which is the priestly function, which opens up the window. 3 is government, 2 is an ark, 4 is a window or a door, and God is looking for our agreement with his heavenly blueprint to establish it on earth. And then you begin to see the government of God outworked. And so each blueprint will have 7 mountains, spheres of governmental authority that they then pattern after the same thing. So it's like a fractal image. You look at something and it looks like this picture, then when you look closely you think that picture is made up of the same pictures, and when you look into that little picture it's made up of the same pictures. That's what God is looking for, something that looks like heaven on earth, that he can mandate his authority into, and that means people fulfilling their destinies and being released in their destinies to outwork it. And so I personally see now benches of 3. I've been helping establishing some. I've found that there's usually a 4th person, which I've called the angel of the house, that brings the agreement between heaven and earth and the priestly function of that in a pastoral way from an apostolic perspective, so that you get agreement all the time to be an open window and a foundation for what God's doing. God's starting to bring these patterns all over. Where I'm seeing them established in government over areas or across these parallels, you're starting to see things really start to shift and things start to move. But I think this is where the line is coming. If God does not see these patterns of heavenly government as our patterns of government on earth, he's not going to occupy it. So a lot of mountains that are set up like that on earth, the pillar of cloud is moved, and they're staying in the wilderness. Whereas those that are embracing being the foundation that others can be released into, rather than the top that stops people getting to, that will be a change, you know. And so I believe that there are benches of 3 which are being established right now over nations, you know, particularly sometimes over cities, sometimes over regions, states, you know, over churches. You know, if it doesn't look like that, it's not going to carry the authority of God. And so it's really important. Those people who are apostolic from a heavenly perspective way and get a blueprint, they need to look to form benches of 3, because they normally form around an apostolic blueprint. But once a blueprint is established, you get a bench of 3 which operates together in unity. So you get a kingly and a prophetic function forming together with the apostolic to bring government. It's not easy, because you have to establish a culture of honor, of openness and honesty to function in agreement with each other, so that there's an honoring of the different perspectives. So it's not just one person say, well, this is it and it's got to be like this. No, that person has their perspective, you have the other perspectives, you bring them together and you get a full picture, which means interdependence, just like, you know, Father, Son, and Spirit. It's like God sends the Spirit points to Jesus, Jesus points to the Father. It's just total preference to one another and a total culture of honor. And so there's stuff to do when you establish a bench of 3. It's not easy to do, because it means honesty, openness, transparency with one another, being real with one another, working through. Yeah, it took us 3 or 4 months here to get to that point where people were willing to say yes. I'm willing to accept what God has called me to do, because I've gone through this and we've established something in relationship, you know. So anything that has a blueprint from heaven should be functioning with a bench of 3 and with 7 mountains, you know, because that's the pattern of heaven, you know. I don't know if that sort of, is there anything specific in that?
So practically, how did you find those other 2 to form that bench of 3?
Well, I mean, I've done it this 3 times personally. With I'm involved in a bench. I've also been helping 3 or 4 other groups to establish these things. So for me, it's like, you know, being a forerunner, carrying an apostolic mantle. I had the blueprint. So I had a blueprint from heaven. We operated the church on that blueprint, and in a sense, you know, we were doing the best we could with an old model. Once I had the revelation of this, then I began to engage in my mountain. I began to call forth the others who would be part of the bench of 3. And then having started to call forth, I went before the ark and I asked God to show me who they were. I then went before our leaders, as we have a group of leaders, and I said, look, okay, here's the blueprint. Now, this is the blueprint that God has developed over a period of time. This is it in pictorial form so you can get a handle on it. This is what it looks like. There's a bench of 3 established in the center of it. There's a group of 7 who administer into the house. We have 7 mountains of government. Who's called to it? You know, and the 2 people I saw sort of sheepishly put their hands up. It was like, well, we think. You know, they were pretty reticent to say yes, but they said we feel called, but we don't feel able. So I said, that's okay, great. Not interested whether you feel able. If you know you're called, and I acknowledge that you're called because you're the 2 people that God showed me, then let's work together at establishing this government. Let's get everything out on the table. Why are you reticent to take responsibility? What is in the past, through mistrust, through bad relationships with other leaders, with wrong authority being administered? Let's get it out. Let's deal with why there are difficulties here. Let's deal with why there are struggles here. You know, let's get this out. Have I done anything that has affected you negatively by the way in which I've led and operated authority? Yes, you have. What is it? Okay, will you forgive me? Let's deal with that. Let's get trust established. You know, let's deal with the motives of our hearts here. Let's make sure that we're doing this out of the right heart. And we spent probably 3-4 months going through that process weekly, getting together, getting things out, sharing, until they got to a point where they said, yeah, we feel that we're willing to say yes, and then we stepped into heaven together. We went onto the mountain, the church mountain, of the ministry mountain, if you like. We were invested with authority by Jesus. He gave us a mantle, crown, scepter. Each of us was given different things that represented the different gifts that we carry, and that's where we started, you know. And we have continued to outwork that. We go in together to get mandates. We go in together to see our scroll. We always bring a different perspective because we're coming from the 3 different perspectives, you know, so that we're not, it's not dependent on one person, you know. And I had to let go and relinquish being the one person. So sorry, no, we're only going to operate when we're in unity. So we've established a governmental relationship of how we work together and how we outwork it. Regionally, I'm part of a regional bench. You know, that formed differently, but it was like I shared some prophetic things to a group of regional leaders, engaged with the regional angel over our region, shared that out loud with a couple, just sort of shared it out, and then another person contacted me and said, what you shared I've seen as well, do you think we could get together? And another guy was like, and I think we should invite this guy as well because he's seen some things, let's get together. So we got together, we started just meeting together once a month, just hanging out. That's all we did. We just hung out, and we found that the things we were sharing inspired each other, and things changed as a result of us just hanging out. We didn't do anything, but things were changing. I then went and sought what was the mandate for this. What is this? Is there something that God's calling us to? God gave me a clear mandate of what it was, a regional apostolic council. I took that back. They both resonated with that. It's not an earthly thing that we're looking for recognition on earth, because we're not telling anyone we're doing that. We're just doing it. We then did the same thing. We then started to share with each other. We began to open things up with each other, form a relational thing. God threw a few spanners in the works that enabled us to work through some practical issues and some issues that caused us to have to deal with things with each other, which worked, really effectively. And then we did the same thing. We stepped into heaven together. We were invested with authority, and we had begin to administer that authority. Now, I'm not saying that it's all fully formed, but that's what we did. Same thing here in our local area, in our town. I began to share with our leaders. I was chairman of churches together, the group of all the different churches, and that gave me some access to begin to share vision-wise why we needed to be operating in the heavenlies. 2 guys really responded with that, asked me to mentor them effectively, in a sense of we got together regularly. We're starting to work that through. They recognize that they're called to that level of authority. We're now beginning to go through the same process. That's really how it works, I've sort of helped a few other groups that are establishing ecclesias in physical places. I've also helped establish 2 other groups who are operating more in a regional or national capacity in certain areas. You just go into heaven and you get your authorization from there. But you need a blueprint. At the end of the day, if there's no blueprint, there can be no bench. So there has to be a heavenly blueprint vision to establish the government with that. If that sort of gives some practical clarity for it.
So where do you get the blueprint in heaven? What room or court or how does that work?
Yeah. Well, in a sense, it's like, everyone has their own blueprint. So you have your own scroll for your own life, and that's the first thing to get hold of. What is my destiny? What is my scroll? Is on that scroll to be part of benches of 3? Because if it isn't to be part of benches of 3 on my scroll, I have no place doing it. So I need to know that I'm called into some level of government to pursue it. It's then you go, what is it for? Is this a blueprint for an ecclesia? Is this a blueprint for a ministry? Is this a blueprint for a sphere of government? If I'm called to something, what am I called to? So I would encourage people to go to the Ark of the Presence of God, start opening up their hearts, seeking God for the blueprint, and look into Him to see what it looks like from His perspective. That is the key. What is God's perspective? Not what our perspective is, but what is His? What is His eternal blueprint? What does this look like? It may not look like this on earth, but what is it from heaven? What does the garden of earth look like from God's perspective in eternity? Not like it looks like now. So that means there's got to be some transformation that takes place to bring it back into what God's original purpose was. So it's just looking for that blueprint, really. I would say that generally you would need to carry some sort of apostolic authority that is then released, because that's what apostolic authority does. It gets the governmental blueprints from heaven to begin to see them released onto earth. So not everyone necessarily will get the blueprints for a bench of 3. Others may well then connect up to a blueprint. That someone starts sharing something, they begin to resonate with it, their spirit starts to vibrate, everything's like, whoa, I'm drawn to this. And then you start to find relationships get connected around those blueprints as people start sharing things. That's where it really comes from. Then you can get obviously strategies for the blueprint. You can get authorization, take the blueprint to the Chancellor's Court, get it sealed, get angelic assignments to it. You can go through the processes of the protocols of heaven, get wisdom, connection to it. There's a lot of things that come. Get the men in white linen connected to it who are associated with that mandate. There's a lot of stuff that takes place around it, but you've got to get one, and you need to be part of one. Everyone should be part of a apostolic heavenly blueprint somewhere. You know, otherwise they're not operating within the framework of being in the government of God. You know,
Yeah.
no, it looks different. It may well be a specific ministry area. It may well be that it's a governmental area over a city or something. That's the key. Then, okay, let's go and get that blueprint. What are the 7 mountains that are associated with that blueprint for our city or our town or our region or our church? What are the governmental areas that we've been called? Because each scroll will have 7 areas of government, and it's absolutely vital that we know what they are. Otherwise, we don't know what we're called to administer. And everything about the kingdom is administrating the kingdom, administrating that government, and operating into it. So, I can only give a sort of overview of it. We've got to start doing it, and ultimately, once we get onto in the engaging God on their pathway of responsibility, that's the stuff that we'll be doing. We'll be learning that, doing it, engaging in it, getting mantles, getting people invested in authority. I have the privilege to see people invested, and to engage them in heaven, and to see Jesus invest them with authority, and it's great. It's part of who I've been called to do, into helping people into their destiny and into the things that God has called them to. Is a desire of my heart. You have to, if you don't carry the blueprint in your heart, you can't govern it. So it's something that you have to have cultivated the desire within your heart for the purposes of God towards that blueprint. And that means spending a lot of time in God's presence, stepping into Him, engaging the 4 faces to see from the perspective of the lion, ox, and the eagle, and the man. And stepping in and seeing from the eternal perspective of the heart of God, of what this looked like, in eternity. Because we're never going to terraform the earth if we don't know what it looked like from God's heart. And so we need to engage in His vision for it, so that we can bring that into what we're doing today, so that tomorrow will become more and more in alignment. So cultivating desire is a really key part. Those that aren't willing to cultivate desire, it's like Jesus said, some people will try and get in the wrong way. You have to come in through the right door, and you have to do things from the right heart and the right motive, and you do that by engaging God in intimacy, spending the time to build that desire. And like Paula was saying, that for years, she's had this desire. Something in her has been drawing her towards, restoration and transformation and terraforming and stuff. And some of these things will probably already be in us that will connect up and draw us to it. But the more time we spend cultivating that according to God's purposes, the easier it is to begin to administrate it, and then to begin to call it into being, to begin to call things that be not as if they are, to release angels, to do the administration of our mountains from that perspective. Because we'll be operating in government, because it's in our heart. We carry it. He's writing it in the tablets of our heart, and that's really, when I'm looking for people, I'm looking for people who don't want earthly recognition. It's nothing about being recognized on earth, really. It's about heavenly recognition. Some people will never ever know what those benches of 3 are doing. I mean, in the benches of 3, I'm
Oh, no.
You'll probably show him that he's lost us.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if it was just mine or if he had a problem.
How come we keep flashing in and out of your face and his face?
I don't
What
know.
do
On
you
mine,
think?
it's just him.
Do you think it has to do with the mute button or something? Sounds.
I don't know. I'm not muted. I don't know. Seems like we're having some technical problems today a little bit.
Yeah, I
So
got
do you
thrown.
see? Nope.
What?
I said, can you see his picture on there now?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's froze. Yeah. So where are you? I guess you're located close to. Where are you at? Are you in Illinois or Texas or
No, I'm in
where you?
Iowa,
Iowa. Okay.
next to
Yeah.
you. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm west of you. You're in
Yeah.
Illinois, aren't
I'm in southern Illinois, so you're north, north and west. Okay.
you? Okay, yeah.
I don't know if he's there. Maybe there he is. Nope. All right, he's coming back.
Okay.
There you
So,
are.
yeah, there we go. So yeah, I mean, it's this. There's a lot to it, but that's what God's
Yeah.
looking for, you know. He's looking for those heavenly patterns, so that He can come and He can bring glory into them and manifest His presence in them. So there we go. Anyway,